Hello and welcome to Roundtable. Is the race to electrically powered vehicles a car crash waiting to happen? Tough new emissions rules could mean the end of the road for petrol and diesel in Europe by 2025. But what about the idea that this kind of acceleration could do more harm than good? It's called the Euro 7. No, not a new vehicle, but an ambitious plan to be car carbon neutral in just a few years. Yet China and the US aren't following suit. So will European car makers and their millions of workers find themselves at a massive disadvantage? It's very good to have your company. I'm David Foster. Volkswagen has just said it won't be making petrol or diesel vehicles by the end of 2035. Not as ambitious as Euro 7, but a bold statement nonetheless. In this programme, we'll see what's possible and what ideas might just get stuck in a dead end. The countdown has started for major changes in the car industry, the switch to all electric. The European Union's Euro 7 plans are shaping up to be a tough set of regulations restricting emissions from petrol and diesel engines. Some industry groups say it could amount to a ban through the back door of the internal combustion engine by as soon as 2025. Many car makers have set out their own targets. Volkswagen will leave the combustion engine market by 2035. Its subsidiary, Audi, by 2033, Sweden's Volvo by 2030, and the UK's Vauxhall also from 2030. Paris, Madrid, Athens, and Mexico City said they would remove diesel cars and vans by 2025. But the car industry is often seen as the engine room of Europe's economy. And inside, there is concern about the pace of these changes. So who could be the winners and losers in the race to go electric? Okay, let's get the conversation going. We go to Milton Keynes first. That is in the UK. Ian Riches is there for us. He follows the electric car market for strategy analytics. Omer Rana is in Cardiff, Professor of Performance Engineering at the University of Cardiff. And we welcome Jean-Francois Mercure, a senior lecturer in global systems at the University of Exeter. I want to start by going into two areas of this. One is the practical side of it, the difficulties, the things we've managed to do that perhaps we didn't think we'd be able to do, and then the objections and the difficulties within the industries, and then expand on those later on in the programme. So let me come to you first of all. Ian, are there things that we've done in the last 10 years that suggest that we're getting on the right track in terms of being able to meet some of these targets?
Yeah, in terms of vehicle electrification, absolutely. On the technology side, we've seen significant strides in battery technology. So whereas what passed for a mass market electric car 10 years ago might have struggled to do 60 to 100 miles on one charge, we're now getting 200 miles, approaching 300 miles from some of the better vehicles on the market. So that's a huge plus point to making them more usable for consumers. And the recharge infrastructure has improved dramatically as well. It's still not as good as it needs to be, absolutely.
Well, this is something we'll go into later on, because, I mean, you say it's better than it was, but, I mean, it's pretty non-existent, really. And imagine if you've got... Imagine if you've got two cars charging, two cars queuing up, and you're waiting behind them, and you know you've got to be somewhere in an hour and a half. You're rather stuck. That's for later in the programme. Omer, very expensive, the batteries. If you charge them too quickly, they overheat. What are the major difficulties?
Yeah, so I think one of the challenges has been to identify battery technologies that can be used to support quicker charging for batteries, but also understanding, where these can be deployed. So, for example, AC charging points can be put on street charging, for example, in urban centers, which would be very useful for people perhaps who might not be able to charge at home, for example. And DC charging or fast charging or ultra fast chargers, usually required for long distance charging. That's something that is currently being developed and could also be deployed, for example, at motorway points or other points within the city. So it's deploying these charging points in addition to batteries I think is going to be a key driver going forward.
It took me about 5 or 6 minutes to to fill up my car with petrol this morning. Are we ever going to be able to do it that quickly with the battery car?
Yeah, probably. I think, but 30 minutes is what I'm aware of at present with shadow charging and for the fast charging infrastructure out there. But probably if the number of vehicles increases on the road, then probably we will be attempting to achieve quicker times for charging.
Jean-Francois, other countries are way ahead, China in particular. We're lagging behind. They know what they're doing and they're not following the rules the same way that we are with this Euro 7 stuff.
Yes. So in China, there's many motivations for developing low carbon technology. The pollution, air pollution, is a big driver for reducing pollution, which at the same time reduces greenhouse gas emissions, which achieves partly the climate targets. And that's motivated some changes. There's quite a lot of investment. But I think electric vehicles are also diffusing and taking off in Europe as well, and to some extent in the United States. And this is really happening very quickly, I would say.
Is the fact that China isn't bound to follow the same rules as what we're discussing here, the Euro 7 rules and the Green Deal, it isn't absolutely fastened to that, making it a lot easier for China? And the converse of that, is it making it more difficult for the European and Western countries while they try to do what they think is the right thing, but it's handicapping them?
The innovation is a bit of a global process. There's many players involved in different parts of the innovation system, and we develop these technologies, and eventually everybody benefits in some way. And the more we invest, the more we improve these technologies. And that's how it's partly a race and it's partly a cooperation issue that we're facing. And as we add more and more investment, then we make progress, and more people are able to buy into the technology, which allows us to make more and more progress. And that's how really we're going to achieve those targets.
This is very much an open conversation, and I see both you, Ian, and you, Omer, nodding your heads, or sometimes, I guess, shake their heads in disbelief of what they've just heard. But that means that you can jump in at any time. So I'm going to go to you first of all, Omer. Was there something you wanted to add to what you heard from Jean-Francois?
Yeah, sure. So I think that, as a market for EV increases, and there will be demand, across a number of different spectrums. So, for example, the power infrastructure that is used, the grid, for example, will also have to respond to that increase in demand. And so in addition to, electric vehicles taking energy from the grid, electric vehicles could also add services to the grid in return. So this kind of, vehicle-to-grid infrastructure, as it improves, you could use the battery of these electric vehicles also, to move energy around the city. So, for example, you could charge in one place, maybe a parking lot or some other infrastructure, and as you move the vehicle to another part of the city, you're taking the energy with you to some extent. I think that opens up a number of other business models, that are yet to be realized when the number of vehicles increases and our infrastructure to support them is also being developed further. So it's still very early days.
Okay, when I was a lot younger than I am now, I had a bicycle which had a thing on the wheel that turned a thing called a dynamo that made the light on the front of the bicycle light up. Now, I know that was sort of disproportionately in favour of the bicycle because I was pedalling hard and it was only quite a dim light. But have we come far enough to be able to get the motion of a car to be able to do more than just hybridly take it along on four wheels, and that you then have to fall back quite quickly onto petrol or diesel or gas or whatever? Are we ever going to get to a point where it's almost frictionless enough to power itself?
So I think the full electric vehicles, the drivetrains on these electric vehicles are improving significantly. Where you do not need to have just a hybrid or a plug-in hybrid, but a full battery-based. I think the components in these vehicles are much more efficient, and the drivetrain getting much better than they used to. I think absolutely. I think the efficiency will certainly increase over time.
You certainly put it far better than I did, Ian. That would be the holy grail, wouldn't it? The car that charges itself.
thermodynamics doesn't allow you to charge yourself as you're driving along, as it were. You're always going to lose some energy, so it's not that you can.
I know,
you can get free energy in that way. But no, the cars are already hugely efficient. As the other contributors have said, we have full battery electric cars with no gasoline or diesel engine in them for many years now. They're getting more and more efficient, and they all feature very good, really, regenerative braking systems. So when we're in that stop-start city traffic, if you use some energy to get up to speed, when the traffic lights change or the traffic grinds to a halt and you apply the brakes, you're not actually squeezing pads against a disc anymore. You are going back to your bicycle, using the whole drivetrain as a dynamo and putting that back into the battery with a very high degree of efficiency.
So Euro 7, hoping to see, if not the end of, and certainly see it in its rear view mirror, the internal combustion engine, not physically but metaphorically, by 2025. Is that realistic at all, Ian?
The industry is still debating this. There's obviously a fair bit of pushback. There are numerous proposals. It's not yet fixed. But yes, you're right that many are seeing that many of the current ideas around Euro 7 as a ban on the internal combustion engine by stealth. It won't be written like that, but the way that it's been tightened up, the limits that are being proposed, some of the ideas about long-term monitoring as well, could make it very difficult to have cost-effective, particularly small gasoline and diesel engines on low-cost cars.
Jean-Francois, I noticed in your conversation you had with our producer that you said you can see no reason why it's not possible.
Yes, there's some challenges in industry to get this on the road. If they can roll out the capacity to produce the cars to meet the demand, then yes, there's no reason why this couldn't work. I think, in my view, it will drastically change the energy system. It will drastically change how we operate in society. But ultimately, do we really mind which type of vehicle we drive when we drive? I think probably not. And this is a change that's been anticipated. There's more and more discussion about it, and we see these vehicles on the road, and they work perfectly well. So in the minds of consumers, I don't think there is any issue there. But again, it's going to be up to industry and partly policy to make this cost accessible to consumers and industry to be able to meet the demand.
Because it is much more expensive, isn't it, at the moment, to buy a proper electric vehicle? Sorry, Ian, you want to say?
It's debatable, actually, now. I was looking at some lease prices in the UK the other day, and if you take the Volkswagen Group, a very, very big player, yes, a Volkswagen Golf is cheaper to lease than a Volkswagen ID3, but it's down to fairly small, like a 20% margin on a monthly payment. That sounds a lot, but that's probably about £40 for the very cheapest leases, which is, you're going to save that much by not having to fill it up with petrol or diesel.
Okay, let's talk about
on a running cost basis. It's almost square now.
Okay, well that's very interesting. Let's talk about some industry objections now. Two quotes coming up. One from Luc Chatel, who's from the French Vehicle Trade Group, representing almost 500,000 workers. The European Commission is scrapping 100 years of European know-how and choosing instead a technology in which the Chinese are 10 years ahead of us. And then VDMA, that's the German mechanical engineering trade body. The planned obligation that new vehicles in Europe must be practically emission-free from 2025 onwards would be an ecological, economic, and technological aberration, leading to a de facto ban on cars and trucks powered solely by internal combustion engines. Europe cannot afford that. This is one for all three of you. Let's start with an ecological disaster. What do you think, Omer?
No, I guess that's not necessarily the case. I guess the question really would become, how are these vehicles charged in the first place? And essentially, the emissions on these vehicles could somehow be, reduced, and the emission targets, as you mentioned, in Euro 7 are going to be met eventually, but 2025, when it's essentially intended for this proposal to come through. But I guess that also where does the energy that is used to generate the power that charges a vehicle come from? So if you look at the end-to-end kind of energy flow within this market, I guess it's important to understand, where is the trade-off that you need to support. But I guess, I'm not so sure that, the technological advancement that is available in electric vehicle technologies is actually quite significant in Europe right now.
And if they represent 400,000 workers, then presumably if we're making electrical vehicles on the same scale, because we no longer have the internal combustion engine, many of those workers will be working in that sector. And the technological idea of it being an aberration is simply sort of sour grapes, perhaps.
That's correct. Yes, I agree. I think the other question is, that one question you would ask is, if you walked into, say, a dealership in, say, 2029, when maybe in 2030, when there would be no diesel sales in the UK, how many, I guess, dealerships would want to still have the traditional models available on their forecourt when, there's also a change in perception in many of the consumers about what vehicles they would like to buy. And one very interesting thing that's happened during COVID-19 is, everybody's kind of realized, what it feels like to have low emissions in the environment when a very limited number of vehicles on the road. Maybe we can, continue to have that kind of air quality in the future also, right?
The COVID bounce, if you like. We'll come back to that in just a moment. But Jean-Francois, you were nodding in agreement with Omer, I'm assuming on the basis that the person who buys the second to last or last petrol or diesel cars might be viewed with as much public disdain as somebody who's walking around coughing and spitting the coronavirus out.
Yes. What makes technology inexpensive typically is scale. So if the scale is large, it's very inexpensive. So by the time we've gone through a transition towards low carbon vehicles, stocking old petrol vehicles will become increasingly something marginal, something that nobody does, because
it'll be a bit like something antisocial, a bit like sort of bootlegging in America in the early 20th century.
But also very expensive. It will be very expensive to fix old vehicles that work on the old technological regime once we've transitioned to the new technological regime. And therefore, the industry will have moved on, and that's what everybody will be doing.
Ian, what about this idea of COVID changing our relationship with the motor vehicle?
I think it has, and in truth, we still don't know exactly how that's going to play out because most of the world is still reacquainting itself with its office. I'm actually in my office today for the first time in ages, so I did drive my car, but many of us have found our commuting patterns have been completely different through COVID. We're highly unwilling to go back to what they were, so part of our need for the car has changed, and so it remains to be seen how that plays out, but everything that I see is actually making it perhaps more likely that we're going to be adopting electrified platforms. If we're not driving as much, then some of those concerns about range and charging just aren't so big.
Let's go back to where we are as a Western world compared to China and I don't know, you can tell me, are there other technologically advanced countries? Ian, do you want to kick off on that one? China's ahead, it's investing heavily. What does it have that we in our part of the world don't have when it comes to these types of cars?
It's had long-term, high-level governmental support, and not just support, but strong push. When China started emerging as a global economic superpower, when its automotive industry started growing, initially the cars that it made were using, in many cases, licensed Japanese gasoline engine technology. They knew they could never compete with the West by making a better petrol engine, or it would be very, very difficult to do that because of the patents that all the Western countries held. So they said, well, we redefined the landscape. If we push ahead on the electric, they foresaw that would be the future.
And where are they? Where are they? How much further ahead? Omer, I want to bring you in on this one so that we're all part of the same conversation. How much further ahead technologically are the Chinese? Is it perhaps because they have greater access to the rare earth metals, which are sometimes used within these batteries? What is it?
So I think that the size of the market in China is huge. I think there's a huge driver that is influencing also, not just the manufacturing or the development of these vehicles within China itself, but also potentially battery technologies that would go into feeding some of these vehicles. I think there's a lot of investment being placed in China to be able to support that. And I think
can you tell us one thing they're doing that we're unable to do?
So I think it's the infrastructure, the energy infrastructure that is used to support these vehicles.
Plug-in points.
I think there's a huge investment in that in China in order to support this. So energy companies, for example, based in Beijing, for example, which we also work with as part of our projects, are investing a huge amount into supporting EVs.
Okay, Jean-Francois, you were nodding. I'm just wondering about how beneficial you think the Euro 7 plan, and indeed other plans of a similar nature, will actually be in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah.
Well, so if we look at the current trend of technology, we're set to see enormous numbers of electric vehicles by 2030, 2040, but that's still not enough to reach low enough emissions to meet the actual targets of net zero by 2050 in Europe. And therefore, there's going to be an acceleration that's going to be needed. And this is the sort of plan that could help reach those targets. Otherwise, in the current trajectory, while we're making good progress, it's not quick enough. Of course, this applies to other sectors as well. But you can imagine that there's going to have to be more programs to roll out the infrastructure and the vehicles in order to be able to achieve net zero by 2050. And the target is established. What needs to be done is to roll out the policy that's going to make this materialize in reality.
Yeah, you see, I'm wondering, there might be those people saying, look, this is going to cost a great deal of money, but the returns on it in terms of the money you don't have to spend in mitigating the problems caused by the internal combustion engine, does it sort of pay for itself? Is that the hope?
Yeah, certainly. And even the electric vehicles themselves are going to become almost certainly less expensive to operate overall than the petrol vehicles. And that's partly because you don't have to pay for all this fuel anymore. And what's economically difficult is not to pay for vehicles. What's economically difficult is what's happening to the economy, where some sectors are gaining new manufacturing jobs and other sectors are losing old fuel transformation, fuel transportation, extraction jobs that will not be needed anymore as we give up operating on oil effectively. That's the true cost, and that's going to be borne by many different countries, including Europe, but also in the Middle East and in the United States. And that transition is going to imply lots of socioeconomic changes worldwide.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, talk about the potential pitfalls. I suppose it all depends where you stand. I'd like each one of you to have a think about some of the possible downsides, if in the short term at least, of having an electric vehicle, other than the fact your battery is very expensive, it takes a long time to charge it up. I'll start up on this one. I wonder what would happen if there was a massive traffic jam on the M25, which we know the orbital road around London is just one enormous car park, and you were stuck there for 3 hours and your battery went flat. What would happen to you all if they were all electric vehicles? That's my thought anyway.
Well, firstly, that would be relatively unlikely to happen because when you're stationary, the drivetrain itself is using no power at all. So the only power you're taking out of the battery is to do your heating, your cooling, your radio, which are relatively low loads. So you can stand still for a long time in an electric car without running out of power. But you're right, it would be the same if you're a gasoline car. Someone would have to come and rescue you. And we've seen in other parts of the world, mobile generators effectively. So a truck can come along with a generator on the back, fire itself up. Yes, you're using diesel at the generator, but gives you enough charge to get you off to the next charging station or pick you up, put you on the back of a tow truck, take you to the next charging station. So really would be dealt with in the same way as a breakdown in a gasoline or a diesel car.
Fascinating. You put my mind at rest to some extent. Omer, your turn.
Yeah, so I guess I agree. I think driver anxiety in terms of running out of charge is slowly being not being a concern anymore with the increasing number of mileage that you can do on these vehicles. But I think we should also realize, the discussion so far has really been about the developed world in some way. But the developing world, where emissions are a real issue, it could also benefit significantly. I'm thinking more of, sitting in a traffic jam in India or Pakistan in a rickshaw, where the driver who sits on a diesel engine is, half deaf anyway because of the sound of the engine. If you put an electric battery in a rickshaw, right? Imagine the benefit that could provide. So I think we need to take a much bigger perspective on this and not just consider the developed world with the BMWs and Audis and the big vehicles, but also consider transportation of other kinds in other parts of the world that could benefit from this.
Okay, but possibly that rickshaw could give light to half the village as well. And I'm not being facetious when I say that. One thing I wanted to bring up, Jean-Francois, you can talk to me about this if you like. Anybody else can jump in. We've only got a couple of minutes. It was mentioned to me that electric vehicles might be more susceptible to cyber attack because they're more likely to be smart cars. Is that anything anybody needs to worry about? Jean-Francois, if you don't want to answer that one, leave it to the technical experts. But what do you think?
I'll leave it to the technical experts, really.
Okay, Ian, Omer, who wants to do it? Okay, go on, Ian.
Yeah.
Yes and no is a simple answer. The only reason they're likely to be more technologically advanced is because they're being built on the very latest platforms, so that they're connected because they are advanced modern cars, not just because they're electric. So any modern car built on a brand new platform will have the same susceptibilities, but also increasingly the same built-in protections to cyber attack.
Okay, quick question for all of you. Sorry, Omer, you wanted to say something, but I want to ask this one. Who has an electric car? Hands up. You see? You're all waiting to see what happens next.
We're all waiting to see what happens.
Absolutely. You want to see the price come down. You want to see that nobody's got stuck on the M25. You want to make sure that nobody's got electrocuted thanks to their massive battery. And you want to make sure that you get the best car possible. I want to say thank you very, very much indeed. It's been fascinating. It's a look into the future, but also a look back at the present. Whoever would have thought that the internal combustion engine, which has provided pleasure as well as pain to an awful lot of people, might be consigned to the past. It's not too far off. Listen, thank you very much indeed, Ian, Omer, and Jean-Francois, and thank you, wherever you happen to be watching this edition of Roundtable. We hope to have your company next time. Until then, from me, David Foster, and the team, a very goodbye.